Hello, good afternoon. I am super excited to be here with you guys. I was just telling Julie earlier, this might have been a few weeks ago, it might have been earlier, that as I was preparing this talk and thinking about okay, what am I going to say? I'm going to say this thing, I'm going to say that thing. Oh, and I should probably introduce myself. And then I realized, no, I haven't been at Hope for 2.5 years. I actually have to introduce myself. People don't just know me everywhere that I go now, which is fine. I kind of like that. Anyway, my name is Jordan Hirsch, formerly Jordan Noblet, if you knew me at Hope. I have since gotten married to this man. I know. He is probably going to be super embarrassed that I share this picture, but this is from our wedding day. We got married in March, so 10.5 months ago. We're almost at a year. His name is Chris. He works at Half Price Books. He's really funny. He's servant-hearted. As I thought about the past 10.5 months, I realized that if I was married to anybody else, I'd probably hate it. But being married to Chris is really cool, so thankful for that. Yeah. So I told you guys that I left Hope 2.5 years ago. Not because I hated it, not because it sucked, but I helped plant Grafted Community Church. So October of 2014, Grafted planted in Northeast Minneapolis, and I think that's Hope's most recent church plant. I'm not sure. Okay, we're still the youngest child. Cool. That means we're the favorite. Anyway, so I work at Grafted Community Church part-time. I am the women's ministry coordinator and a lot of other things. You wear a lot of different hats at church plants. So that's a little bit about me work-wise. And then personally, the only thing you really need to know about me is that I love Star Trek. So this is me, the only themed birthday party that I've ever had in my whole life. I turned 23, and I had a Star Trek themed birthday party. It was the best birthday party in the history of birthday parties. Yeah, girl. Right. That's me with my cake in my old house. Pretty sure you were there. Yeah, Paul was there. So I love Star Trek. I promise to keep Star Trek references to a minimum, but I'm not going to say that they're not going to happen. So anyway, that is enough about me. Let's talk about more important things. I have been tasked this afternoon with talking to you about the church as a witness to the unbelieving world, specifically in Paul's letters. And as I've been reading Paul the past couple months, I guess, I've realized that Paul has a lot of things to say about a lot of things, which you've probably realized as well. So I'm actually going to keep this talk focused on 1 Corinthians and a couple of ideas that he gives us specifically about being engaged and being set apart as believers as we witness to the unbelieving world. Before I dive into 1 Corinthians, though, I do want to give you a little bit of history. So we're going to talk about the whole Bible in 30 seconds. So context regarding how God's people are called to interact with not God's people, because that's kind of the idea of the church interacting with unbelievers. In the Old Testament, we see the call to be holy and set apart. Think like the Levitical laws, the laws that say, don't get tattooed for the dead, don't mix your dairy and your meat, that kind of thing. Think of the different wars on different people. All of those were kind of inspired by being God's set apart people. God wanted to show you are not like the people that follow other gods. In all of that, right, that's the big controversial topic in the Old Testament. In all of that, we also get to see provisions in the law for being open, being welcoming to the alien, the foreigner, the stranger that would come into the camp. Those people couldn't stay the way they were. They needed to be circumcised, they needed to follow the law. But those provisions for them were there. So that's the whole Old Testament, real quick. And then we get to Jesus, and Jesus, kind of like Paul, has a lot of things to say. But the two I really want to focus on before we get really going, Jesus said, be in the world, not of it, right? So be in the world, be engaged, be amongst unbelievers, because you can't really help it, right? So be in the world, but be set apart, be different. And then he also said, go make disciples of all nations, which again, being, going out into the world, but not leaving, there's going to be a lot of negatives in this sentence. Not leaving non-disciples the way you found them. So make those non-disciples into disciples. Be engaged with them. Okay. Sorry, that was the whole Bible leading up to 1 Corinthians. Now let's actually dive into 1 Corinthians. So there's a lot of different aspects, different ways that Paul specifically talks about being engaged and being set apart. I only have 20 minutes with you guys this afternoon. I promised Julie I wouldn't go over, and I always keep my promises. That's not true. Anyway, so I'm only going to talk about one way that we as a church can be set apart from the world, and one way that we can be engaged with non-believers. I'm going to keep it focused. I'm going to keep it hopefully on topic. There's a lot of different ways that Paul talks about, but these are two that I found in 1 Corinthians that have really been on my heart the past couple months. So the questions we're going to look at, we're going to first look at being set apart. The first one is, are we different in our relationships with one another? That's different than unbelievers would be. And then regarding being engaged, how are we engaging with unbelievers? Are we doing that, and what does that look like? Okay, that's where we're going. Here we go. So regarding our how we look different in our relationships, I want to take a look at 1 Corinthians 6, verses 1 to 8. So 1 Corinthians 6, 1 to 8 says, when one of you has a grievance against another, does he dare go to law before the unrighteous instead of the saints? Or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world is to be judged by you, are you incompetent to try trivial cases? Do you not know that we are to judge angels? How much more then matters pertaining to this life? So, if you have such cases, why do you lay them before those who have no standing in the church? I say this to your shame. Can it be that there is no one among you wise enough to settle a dispute between the brothers, but brother goes to law against brother, and that before unbelievers? To have lawsuits at all with one another is already a defeat for you. Why not rather suffer wrong? Why not rather be defrauded? But you yourselves wrong and defraud even your brothers. So looking at this passage, disclaimer, I'm not going to talk about how we're supposed to judge the angels because I have no idea what that means. So don't ask me. You can ask someone else that knows more about this than me, because I don't know. Apparently Paul thought it was common knowledge. I'm not going to talk about that. Instead, I'm going to talk about what Paul is saying here. Paul is talking about, okay, you're not all the same. You have differing opinions. You're not all perfect. You're not all fully sanctified yet. So you have conflicts. Totally normal, right? What do you do with those conflicts, though? How do you act? What do you do as brothers in the Corinthian church? What do you do when you disagree with each other? How do you treat each other? Well, according to this, the Corinthians were having lawsuits between each other outside of the church. We don't get the full story here, but it seems like they couldn't settle it within the church. Maybe they hadn't even tried. I don't want to make that assumption, but they couldn't settle it within the church, so they took it outside of the church. And this is what unbelievers are seeing. This is the witness that they are presenting and exhibiting to unbelievers. In that, Paul's not very happy. I don't know if you got that from reading this. Paul's tone is not very happy. He kind of thinks it's outlandish. He kind of thinks he's mortified with this, right? So that would lead me to believe that that's not a good thing. Disputes should be settled within the church. Joel, you need to fix this problem.
I think it wants to download Java again.
Does it? Joel, you did it. Thank you. Joel Stegman, everyone. Solving problems left and right. Now I'm completely off topic. Anyway, so Paul is basically saying you have disputes. This is normal. That's fine. But you need to figure out how to deal with them amongst believers, because unbelievers are watching. Unbelievers, you are representatives to Christ to them, and unbelievers are watching. So I want to tell you a little story as we talk about how our relationships are different. Because Paul is saying, unbelievers take their conflicts to law, to judges. You should not be doing that. So, we're not exactly living in that time still, but I want to kind of apply those principles to our relationships today. So my question for this is, how are our relationships different? Specifically, how are we different when we're in conflict, okay? So I have two stories for you. I am not going to talk about Meryl Streep and Donald Trump, I promise. And I always keep my promises. So Meryl Streep, I don't know if you've seen in the news lately. Meryl Streep last week in her Golden Globe speech had a lot of things to say about, she didn't mention Donald Trump by name, but it was implied who she was talking about. Donald Trump wasn't very happy with this, so he took to Twitter and had some things to say about Meryl Streep, and that's all I'm going to say about them. But there was quite the hubbub on social media. I don't know if you've seen it, but lots of people had things to say about Meryl Streep. Lots of people had things to say about Donald Trump, which isn't surprising. Lots of people kind of denounced both of them and said, you guys are both ridiculous. What's going on? Okay, so that's story number one. Story number two. A few weeks ago, the Gospel Coalition came out with an article about female MMA fighters, kind of criticizing them, or a little more harshly than criticizing, but had an opinion on female MMA fighters. The next day, Rachel Held Evans, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with her, but Rachel Held Evans took to social media and just said, I don't agree with your article, and I think that you need to be concerned about more important things in the world than this. Again, I'm not going to talk about either one of those sides. It's not the point. But people took to social media, people who claim to follow Christ, believers took to social media and said, Rachel Held Evans, you are an antichrist, you are a false teacher, a false prophet. And they didn't stop there. They said, you are not intelligent, you are illogical, you are rash, you have you shouldn't even be speaking at all. Criticized her character, said some very inflammatory things. And people that claim to follow Christ, believers, said the Gospel Coalition, that article was ridiculous. You are sexist. You are misogynistic. You are a bunch of old, angry white dudes who want to maintain your authority and your privilege. You have no business saying what you said. Okay? Both of those camps and some camps in the middle all claim to follow Christ. So my question for you guys is, how is that different? From an unbeliever's vantage point. They see people attacking Meryl Streep and Donald Trump. They see people attacking the Gospel Coalition and Rachel Held Evans. How is that different? How are believers in that case giving a different witness than unbelievers in that case? Joel.
I'm just going to stay here.
You can stay there if you want a front row seat. That's fine. Thank you. I know that there are differences, right? I know that one is speaking on theology, one is speaking on politics. Like, there are different authorities in those camps, right? I also know that social media is not the church, but social media is a place that believers can have a different presence than unbelievers. It is kind of the marketplace, the public forum of our day. And this is how people are dealing with conflicts. They're attacking people's character and not what they're saying. They're attacking people's faith and not their opinion. So those are my two stories. And in that, I just want to make the point that we should be different when we have conflicts with each other. Again, those are the Gospel Coalition as an entity and Rachel Held Evans are not in the same church. They're not in the same small group, right? But their actions and people's responses to them are on witness and display for unbelievers to see. So my question in all of that is, how do we deal with conflicts with unbelievers? You specifically, how do you deal with conflicts with people that are in your small group, people that are your friends, people that are fellow believers but aren't at Hope necessarily, right? Like, I'm not at Hope. And let's say I post something on social media or I say something up here that you just find outlandish, which is fine. But what do? Do you approach someone with grace? Do you approach someone with patience and mercy, with forgiveness and empathy and humility? Or do you attack their character? Do you say, you have this one part of theology screwed up, so you must be a horrible heathen who's never even read your Bible? What do you do? There are, the whole spectrum of topics. There's abortion, there's politics, there's open theism. There's all those things, and some are of more severe importance than others. But I'm not saying we all need to agree on everything, right? But I'm saying when a believer disagrees with you, how do you respond? Because people are watching, and we should be offering unbelievers something different than the world is offering them, right? We've been called to be set apart and holy in that way. So are we offering them something different? If we're not offering them something different, then we're kind of like Minnesota sports teams. So you have Twins fans who all summer are just wrought with heartbreak. They're wrought with devastation and with disappointment. And then the fall and the winter gets here, and they're like, no, we are going to be offered something different. We're going to be offered the Vikings. And I don't really know if that's, being offered something different. I'm sorry for all of you Twins and Vikings fans. I'm a Cubs fan, and this year was a heck of a year, right? So, sorry for attacking your sports teams. Go Cubs. But I need to move on, because I promise not to go over. The last thing I want to say about being set apart is just what Jesus said. I feel like that's looking at the answers in the back of the book. I'm cheating. But what Jesus said, one thing Jesus had to say about this is in John 13:35. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. So our interactions with each other are how people know Christ, right? So are our interactions with each other wrought with conflict and anger and a lack of resolution of differences, or is it full of grace and love and patience and empathy and humility? Okay, so that was one side of the coin, right? Being set apart. We're gonna go all the way over to the other side of my presentation. How are we engaging with unbelievers? What does that look like? Because there's two sides to the same coin, right? You want to be engaged and you want to be set apart. You don't want to be so set apart that you're not accessible. So, if you're so different than the rest of the world and not engaging in anything of the world, unbelievers aren't going to feel like they can be a part of that. They're not going to feel welcome. So, to talk about this, I'm going to look at 1 Corinthians 14, verses 20 to 25. It's kind of a doozy of a passage, but here we go. So it says, brothers, do not be children in your thinking. Be infants in evil, but in your thinking be mature. In the law it is written, by people of strange tongues and by the lips of foreigners will I speak to this people, and even then they will not listen to me, says the Lord. Thus tongues are a sign not for believers but for unbelievers, while prophecy is a sign not for unbelievers but believers. If therefore the whole church comes together and all speak in tongues, and outsiders or unbelievers enter, will they not say that you are out of your minds? But if all prophesy and an unbeliever or outsider enters, he is convicted by all, he is called to account by all, the secrets of his heart are disclosed, and so falling on his face he will worship God and declare that God is really among you. So I don't want to talk about this passage. I don't want to talk about what tongues means. I don't want to talk about if speaking in tongues still occurs today. I'm sorry. I don't have all the answers, Joel. I don't want to talk about that. I also don't want to talk about, what does prophesying look today? Is it foretelling? Is it forthtelling? Is it, speaking truth? I'm not going to talk about that. What I do want to highlight in this passage, though, is that there seems to be, as Paul in 1 Corinthians, especially towards the tail end, is talking about orderly worship. If you look at the end of 1 Corinthians, he's talking about, Corinthians, you guys are great and I love you, but you're a little chaotic when you all get together. You're getting drunk on communion wine and spinning in circles to try and have visions. And he has a call for order in that. And in that call for order, kind of tucked in here about tongues and prophesying, is his point that there are different gifts given to the body for unbelievers' benefit and for believers' benefit. Tongues is for one, prophecy is for the other. And so again, I want to kind of take that little nugget of truth and extract it to talk about how do we engage with non-believers? How do we engage with those that don't follow Christ, that do come to our gatherings, right? How does the church witness to them in that way, in an engaged way? So naturally, I'm going to go to what I know best, not sports, but Star Trek. So, if you remember at the beginning of my talk, I said that when I was 23, which was almost 4 years ago, my birthday's next weekend, I'll be 27. I know, it's exciting. Also, Jordan Anderson, that I think talks tomorrow, his birthday is also the 22nd. Same name, same birthday. What are the chances? Anyway, now I'm derailed. So, I had a Star Trek themed birthday party. And part of that was that I love Star Trek. I love celebrating Star Trek. And part of that was most of my friends don't know anything about Star Trek. It's really sad. So I kind of wanted to be a Star Trek evangelist in that. So I was like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? I could have, at my birthday party, talked about the ethics of using the transporter, right? Like, does it actually take you somewhere else, or does it just make a clone of you and send you somewhere else and the original you was gone? Like, is that ethical? Is it not ethical? Could have talked about that. I could have talked about the elaborate politics that take place in Deep Space Nine between the Cardassians, not the Kardashians, the Cardassians and the Bajorans, right? Like, that's wrought with political tension. Or I could have talked about how Romulans, right there in the lower left corner, favorite species in all of Star Trek, are completely underutilized in all 6 series, right? Even the animated series, which you probably didn't know there was one, but there is. Only 1 season, not very good. Anyway, so Romulans are completely underutilized. I could have gone on and on with all my 20 friends or whatever that were there. But instead, I thought, no, newcomers to Star Trek don't want to hear that. Maybe the occasional person that is excited about the ethics of cloning would be excited. But in general, no, you need to make it more accessible. You need to speak their language. So we had Romulan ale, which was just blue Gatorade. We had Star Trek cookies, and we watched The Wrath of Khan, which most people would say is the best Star Trek movie. I don't think so. That's okay. It's one of the most accessible bits of Star Trek. You know, if I'd had my choice, we would have watched episode 12 of season 5 of Voyager, because that is the best episode of Star Trek. But we didn't. We watched something that I would enjoy less, but it was more acceptable. For all of you non-Star Trek fans, though, to kind of lay this out, I went to Larry Osborne because he says things better than I do in his books. So this is from the book Sticky Church. And he, in this, I love this graphic. This was eye-opening for me. So in this, he kind of talks through, based on who you're wanting to get through the funnel, okay? Who do you want through the funnel on the left is what you do on the right, okay? So do I want only absolute Star Trek lovers to come to my birthday party? No, because I don't know any of them. I only know me. So I don't want to go to a party by myself. That doesn't sound fun to me, and I'd have way too many cookies. So I need to do something more accessible. Similarly, if you want unbelievers to come to an event, you need to do something more light. You don't want to do an in-depth study of the book of Hebrews, right? Like, that's not going to, like, scratch an unbeliever's itch. Maybe it will, but probably not. And I don't want to say this in that, like, you should never have an in-depth Bible study. You should never do an intense worship experience or a leadership training, because that's not real. You know, like, I'm not going to meet with my mentor and be like, I want an unbeliever to come, so we're not going to study the Bible together, and I'm not going to talk about, like, my issues with whatever, my husband or whatever. That doesn't make sense. But what I am saying is, when you want unbelievers to be there, whether that's at your small group, right? You want an open chair at your small group, you need to kind of not cater it to them, but keep in mind with what you're doing, whether it's what you're talking about, how you're talking about it, you need to keep that in mind. Sunday morning, the music you have, what you preach on, that kind of thing will signal, you hear the like seeker-sensitive churches, that kind of thing. Like, they are maybe more accessible to those who don't have a Christian background. That's very intentional. Like, they focus their Sunday morning on who they want to reach. And similarly, we should be, I know that all of you don't plan Sunday morning at Hope, right? But be thinking about that in your small group. Be thinking about that in your, whenever you're gathered with other believers. If you're with your off-road cohort, it's probably okay that you have an intense Bible study, right? Like, you're not going to invite an unbeliever to that meeting. But if you do, maybe lighten it up a little bit, right? I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to give you 5 more seconds to look at this graphic because I think it's amazing. And then I'm going to wrap things up. Okay, that's probably less than 5 seconds, but whatever. I felt uncomfortable. So, being engaged, being set apart, right? Two sides of the same coin. I know that I kind of flew through this, and it's a lot to take in. But the principles, I want you to remember the principles. And in that, I'm just going to leave you with these 2 questions to talk about. Because I know I asked a lot of questions but didn't give a lot of answers. Now you guys get to talk about it for, I think, what, like 20 minutes? 20 minutes? So here are your questions. How are our relationships with one another showing that we are set apart? Right? We're supposed to be set apart. We're supposed to be holy. We're supposed to be different than what the world is offering. How does that play out in our relationships? And then the second question is, how are you doing at engaging unbelievers where they're at, not where you're at, both individually and corporately? So those are your, I don't know, Julie, do I just like send them somewhere?
Yeah, you guys have, so dinner starts at 5:30. We got started a little bit late. So if you need more time, you can take it. You have a full hour for dinner, or you can continue your conversation with dinner. So.
Great, thanks guys.